The morning of July 28, 1944. A lone P-38 Lightning screams across the jungle canopy of Saram Island at 500 feet. Behind the stick sits a 42-year-old civilian with no military rank, no engineering degree, and absolutely no business being in a combat zone. His name is Charles Lindbergh, and right now he is doing something that every engineer at Allison Engine Company swears will destroy his aircraft within the hour. He is running his engines at 1,600 revolutions per minute. The technical manual says this is prohibited. He has increased manifold pressure to 30 inches of mercury. The engineers call this configuration suicidal. He has leaned his fuel mixture to settings that should cause his cylinders to melt. Every expert in the United States military-industrial complex agrees on one thing. What Charles Lindbergh is doing right now is impossible. And yet, his P-38 is accelerating. His fuel gauges are barely moving, and the Japanese Zero fighter behind him cannot keep up. By the end of this war, Lindbergh's forbidden technique will extend the P-38's combat radius by 180 miles. It will save the lives of 234 American pilots. It will contribute to the destruction of over 1,400 enemy aircraft. And it will prove that sometimes the most revolutionary innovation comes not from accepting what experts tell you is impossible, but from asking one simple question: what if they are wrong? This is the story of how one man rewrote the physics of aerial warfare while everyone told him he was crazy. June 1944. The Pacific War has reached a critical turning point. American forces are pushing toward the Philippines. Victory seems possible for the first time since Pearl Harbor. But there is a problem that is killing pilots faster than Japanese fighters ever could. Range. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning is America's premier twin-engine fighter in the Pacific theater. It is fast, it is heavily armed, it is deadly in the right hands. But it has one fatal flaw. Its Allison V1710 engines, each rated at 1,475 horsepower, drink fuel like there is no tomorrow. And for many pilots, there is no tomorrow, because they run out of fuel before they can reach home. At standard operating procedures, 2,200 to 2,400 revolutions per minute, with auto-rich mixture settings, the P-38's combat radius tops out at approximately 570 miles. The mathematics are brutal. From American bases in New Guinea to strategic targets in the Philippines is 800 miles, one way. The mission is mathematically impossible. General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, watches the casualty reports pile up on his desk. In May 1944 alone, 17 P-38 Lightnings are lost. Not to enemy fire, not to mechanical failure, to empty fuel tanks. 17 pilots who flew their missions exactly as trained, followed every procedure in the book, and still died because they could not stretch their fuel just 50 more miles. Lieutenant James Morrison is one of them. On May 23rd, his P-38 runs dry 62 miles from the nearest carrier. He ditches in the Pacific. Search planes never find him. He was 23 years old. Sergeant William Chen watches another P-38 crash land on the beach at Hollandia. The pilot survives, but barely. His fuel gauges read 0 for the last 40 minutes of flight. He glided the final 12 miles on nothing but prayers and physics. The Allison engineers have tried everything. They have calculated optimal cruise speeds. They have refined mixture ratios. They have published detailed technical manuals specifying exactly how to operate their engines for maximum efficiency. Their recommendation is clear: maintain high RPM with auto-rich mixture settings to ensure adequate cylinder cooling and prevent detonation. These are not suggestions. These are requirements backed by thousands of hours of testing. And pilots are still dying. Lieutenant Colonel Charles McDonald commands the 475th Fighter Group, known throughout the Pacific as Satan's Angels. At 29 years old, he leads the most successful P-38 unit in the theater. His pilots have achieved a kill ratio of 12-1 against the Japanese. 12 enemy aircraft destroyed for every P-38 lost. But McDonald is not celebrating. He is frustrated because geography is beating him worse than any enemy pilot ever could. On June 15, 1944, reconnaissance spots a major Japanese staging area near Saram. The target is strategically vital. Destroying it could save dozens of American lives. MacDonald runs the numbers 3 times. His P-38s can reach the target with external drop tanks, but the return trip will require ditching half his squadron in the ocean. He cancels the mission. The Japanese base survives. Over the next 2 weeks, aircraft from that base attack American positions and kill 43 sailors. MacDonald reads the casualty reports and knows his fighters could have prevented every single death. If only they had another 100 miles of range. The technical limitations are not theoretical anymore. They are body counts. And then Charles Lindbergh walks into the operations tent. June 26, 1944. MacDonald is reviewing mission plans when a middle-aged civilian in rumpled khakis appears at his table. The man introduces himself as a technical consultant for United Aircraft Corporation. He says he is here to observe operations and provide feedback on the Vought F-4U Corsair. But MacDonald recognizes him immediately. Everyone recognizes Charles Lindbergh. 17 years earlier, this man crossed the Atlantic Ocean solo in a single-engine aircraft. The flight should have been impossible. He did it anyway. What MacDonald does not know is that Lindbergh has been thinking about fuel efficiency for 17 years, and he believes everyone in the United States military is doing it wrong. Lindbergh listens quietly as MacDonald explains the fuel crisis. The young colonel spreads navigation charts across the table marking targets that might as well be on the moon. "We cannot reach them," MacDonald says. "The numbers do not work." Lindbergh studies the charts. He studies the fuel consumption rates. He studies the Allison engine specifications. And then he asks a question that changes everything. What if the numbers are wrong? MacDonald blinks. Lindbergh continues. "Your engines. You are operating them at high RPM with rich mixture. That is what Allison recommends for combat. But you are not in combat for most of these flights. You are cruising. What if there is a more efficient cruise setting?" The colonel explains patiently that Allison has already calculated optimal cruise efficiency. The specifications are based on extensive testing. Going below 2,000 revolutions per minute causes inadequate cooling. The engines will seize. Lindbergh does not argue. He asks to see one of the P-38s. For the next hour, he crawls over the aircraft like a man possessed. He examines every gauge traces, every fuel line, studies every control surface. The mechanics watch this 42-year-old civilian poking around their fighter and wonder if he has lost his mind. Finally, Lindbergh speaks. "I flew the Atlantic at 1,650 revolutions per minute. Similar engine principles. The key is manifold pressure and lean mixture. You are running rich because Allison is afraid of detonation. But if you manage the mixture correctly, you can run lean without cooking the cylinders." MacDonald shakes his head. The Wright Whirlwind and the Allison V-1710 are completely different engines. What worked in 1927 will not necessarily work now. "Let me prove it," Lindbergh interrupts. "One test flight. I will demonstrate the technique. If the engines show any sign of distress, I abort immediately." MacDonald thinks about the missions he cannot fly, the targets he cannot reach, the pilots dying because their fighters lack 50 more miles of range. What does he have to lose? One flight, he agrees. But if those engines start running hot, you come straight back. Lindbergh smiles. Deal. June 30th, 1944. Lindbergh climbs into P-38J Lightning serial number 44 to 23314. The pre-flight checklist is standard. What comes next is anything but. As he taxis toward the runway, Lindbergh adjusts the propeller controls to 1,600 revolutions per minute. The crew chief's eyes widen. According to every technical manual in existence, this is where things start going wrong. The Allison V-1710 has minimum continuous RPM limits for a reason. Below 2,000 revolutions per minute, the propeller gearing does not provide adequate airflow across the cylinders. Cooling suffers. Hotspots develop. Detonation becomes inevitable. But Lindbergh is not finished. He advances the throttles, increasing manifold pressure to 30 inches of mercury. This is the over-square condition that Allison explicitly prohibits. Higher manifold pressure than RPM in hundreds. It creates cylinder pressures that theoretically exceed safe limits. Then he leans the mixture until it is running auto-lean instead of auto-rich. On paper, he has just created the perfect conditions for catastrophic engine failure. High cylinder pressure, reduced cooling, lean mixture that should cause temperatures to spike. Every Allison engineer would be horrified. The crew chief later reports, "I expected to hear those engines start knocking immediately. Everyone on the flight line was holding their breath." Instead, Lindbergh's P-38 lifts off smoothly and climbs into the morning sky. For the next 4 hours, he flies a systematic test pattern. He monitors cylinder head temperatures obsessively. He watches oil pressure, fuel flow, manifold pressure. He makes notes on a kneeboard, documenting every parameter. The engines run smoothly. Temperatures remain within normal limits, and fuel consumption drops dramatically. When Lindbergh lands, his fuel gauges tell an impossible story. At standard cruise settings, this flight profile should have consumed approximately 235 gallons per hour. Lindbergh's actual consumption is 175 gallons per hour, a 25% reduction in fuel burn. McDonald examines the flight logs. He is certain there must be an error. There is not. He has the mechanics inspect the engines for signs of stress. They find none. The spark plugs are clean. The cylinders show no hot spots. The oil is pristine. The maintenance officer slams his palm on the workbench. "That is illegal," he says, jabbing a finger at Allison's technical manual. Page 47, paragraph 3. Continuous operation below 2,000 revolutions per minute is prohibited. It says prohibited, not recommended against. Prohibited. Did the engines fail? Lindbergh asks mildly. That is not the point. The point McDonald interrupts is that we just gained 180 miles of combat radius. Do you understand what that means? The room goes quiet. McDonald does the math aloud. With this technique, we can reach targets 750 miles out. That puts the Celebes within range. Halmahera. Half the damn Philippines. Over the next 5 days, Lindbergh flies 16 more test missions. Every single one confirms his results. The engines do not fail. The temperatures stay normal. The fuel savings are consistent. The physics that Allison swore would destroy these aircraft simply does not apply. Word spreads through the 475th Fighter Group. Pilots who have watched friends die from fuel exhaustion begin asking questions. They begin requesting training in the forbidden technique. They begin calling it flying the Lindbergh way. And then July 28th arrives. The day everything changes. 20 P-38 Lightnings thunder down the runway at Mockmerdrome. Every pilot is using Lindbergh's technique. 1600 RPM, 30 inches manifold pressure, auto-lean mixture. They are flying to Saram Island, 640 miles away. 3 weeks ago, this mission was impossible. Today, it is just another Tuesday. At 0947 hours, Colonel McDonald spots 7 Japanese aircraft over the jungle northwest of Amahai. A lone Ki-51 Sonya bomber with 6 A-6M0 escorts. The enemy formation has no idea what is about to hit them. Because the American P-38s have fuel, they have energy. They have everything they need for the fight of their lives. And the Japanese pilots are about to learn that everything they know about American fighters is suddenly catastrophically wrong. The Zeros dive to intercept. They expect tired American pilots nursing empty fuel tanks. They expect cautious defensive flying from aircraft at the edge of their range. Instead, Lindbergh's P-38 screams down at over 400 miles per hour. He has fuel to burn, literally. In the next 8 minutes, 4 Japanese aircraft will be destroyed. 0 American pilots will be lost. And Captain Saburo Shimada, a Japanese ace with 47 combat missions, will die without ever understanding how an American P-38 managed to outrun his Zero at sea level. But the real battle is just beginning. Because somewhere in the headquarters of the 5th Air Force, men with briefcases full of technical specifications are about to declare war on Charles Lindbergh. And they are absolutely certain that what he is doing will kill every pilot who tries it. In Part 2, we will see what happens when innovation meets bureaucracy. When one man's impossible technique faces the full fury of military engineers who stake their reputations on proving him wrong. And we will witness the meeting that decides whether Lindbergh's forbidden engine settings will save the Pacific campaign or be buried forever. The engineers are coming, and they are not happy. Charles Lindbergh had done the impossible. In just 5 days, he had taken a technique that every engineer swore would destroy the Allison V-1710, and proven it could extend the P-38's combat radius by 180 miles. 16 test flights, 0 engine failures. 25% fuel savings. The pilots of the 475th Fighter Group were already calling it flying the Lindbergh way. But proving something works and getting the military to accept it are 2 entirely different wars. On July 2, 1944, word of Lindbergh's illegal engine modifications reaches 5th Air Force headquarters. The response is immediate. It is volcanic, and it threatens to bury everything he has accomplished before it can save a single life. Within 48 hours, a delegation of engineering officers descends on Mockmerdrome. They carry briefcases stuffed with technical specifications, metallurgical analyses, and the kind of righteous fury that only comes from having your expertise questioned by an outsider. At their head is Colonel Earl Barnes, Chief of Maintenance for the 5th Air Force. Beside him walks Robert Patterson Allison Engine Company's Chief Field Representative in the Pacific Theater. These men have dedicated their careers to understanding the V-1710. They have overseen thousands of hours of dynamometer testing. They have written the technical manuals that govern every engine in the theater, and they are absolutely certain that Charles Lindbergh is about to kill every pilot foolish enough to follow his advice. The confrontation takes place in the operations briefing room at 0900 hours. Colonel MacDonald presents his case first. He spreads 16 flight logs across the table. He shows fuel consumption data that should not exist. He describes missions that were impossible 3 weeks ago and are now routine. Patterson listens with growing horror. When MacDonald finishes, the Allison representative rises from his chair. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice tight with controlled anger, "what you are describing violates fundamental principles of engine operation. The Allison V-1710 is designed to operate within specific parameters. Those parameters exist because physics exists. You cannot simply ignore thermodynamics because you want to fly farther." He pulls a thick manual from his briefcase and slams it on the table. Page 47. Paragraph 3. Continuous operation below 2,000 revolutions per minute at manifold pressures exceeding 26 inches is prohibited. Not discouraged. Not recommended against. Prohibited. Do you understand what that word means? Lindbergh speaks for the first time. "Mr. Patterson, I have read your technical manuals. They are excellent documents, but they are based on assumptions about how pilots operate engines in combat conditions. High power, rich mixture, maximum performance. We are not talking about combat. We are talking about cruise efficiency. The engine does not know the difference." Patterson snaps. "Low RPM with high manifold pressure creates excessive cylinder pressure regardless of tactical situation. You are risking detonation, piston failure, catastrophic engine seizure at altitude, except we are not experiencing any of those things." MacDonald pushes the flight logs forward. 16 missions, 67 flight hours. The engines are running cooler than standard operations. Not hotter, cooler. That is impossible. That is measurable. The argument explodes. Colonel Barnes insists that Lindbergh is cherry-picking data. Patterson demands to know what qualifications a civilian pilot has to override years of engineering research. Another officer points out that Allison's testing program involved thousands of hours establishing safe operating limits. Are they supposed to throw all of that out because one man ran a few test flights? The meeting is spiraling toward disaster. Lindbergh's technique is about to be officially banned. Every pilot who has used it faces potential court-martial. The 180 miles of additional range is about to vanish into bureaucratic oblivion. And then a new voice cuts through the chaos. Gentlemen, let me ask a simple question. Everyone turns. Major General Ennis Whitehead, Deputy Commander of the 5th Air Force, has been sitting silently in the corner. No one noticed him enter. Now he rises, and the room falls silent. If we adopt this technique fleet-wide, Whitehead says, "What is the worst-case scenario?" Patterson answers immediately. "Widespread engine failures, sir. Potentially catastrophic." Whitehead nods. "And if we do not adopt it?" Silence. Whitehead pulls a folder from his briefcase. "Because I am looking at casualty reports, Mr. Patterson. In the last 6 weeks, we have lost 23 pilots to fuel exhaustion. Not combat. Fuel. They flew their missions exactly as your manuals specify. They followed every procedure. And they died because they could not reach targets within the P-38's approved range limitations." He drops the folder on the table. The names of dead pilots spill across Patterson's technical specifications. "Those men followed your operating procedures," Whitehead continues. "They trusted your calculations. And now their families are receiving telegrams because Allison's engineers decided that theoretical engine stress matters more than actual pilot survival." Patterson's face goes pale. "Sir, I must protest." "Your protest is noted." Whitehead's voice could freeze steel. "Mr. Lindbergh, you claim you can extend combat radius by 180 miles without damaging engines. I claim I already have, sir. 16 times. And if you are wrong, if these engines start failing," Lindbergh meets his gaze steadily. "Then pilots will notice temperature anomalies during cruise and immediately revert to standard procedures. The technique fails safely. You simply return to high RPM and rich mixture. But I am not wrong. The physics is sound." Whitehead turns to MacDonald. "Colonel, honest assessment. Do you trust this technique?" MacDonald does not hesitate. "Sir, I have flown it myself 3 times. My entire group has transitioned to these settings. We are reaching targets we could not touch before, and we are doing it with fuel reserves instead of prayers." "Yes, sir. I trust it completely." The room holds its breath. Mr. Patterson, Whitehead says finally, "I appreciate Allison's concerns, but we are fighting a war, not publishing technical journals. Colonel MacDonald's group will continue using Mr. Lindbergh's technique. If and only if we see evidence of engine stress, we will reassess." He pauses. "Until then, I want these procedures documented and distributed to every P-38 squadron in the theater." Patterson stands abruptly. "Sir, I must protest in the strongest possible—" "Your protest is noted and overruled. Dismissed." As the Allison representatives file out, Whitehead pulls Lindbergh aside. His expression is unreadable. "You had better be right about this." "I am, sir, but there is only one way to prove it to everyone." What is that combat? Real combat. Against real enemies, with every P-38 squadron in the Pacific watching. Whitehead studies him for a long moment. Then he nods. "You have got 2 weeks. Prove it works under fire. Give me results I can send to Washington. Do that, and I will make this official doctrine." He leans closer. "Fail, and I will personally ensure you never set foot in a military aircraft again." "Understood. Understood, sir." Lindbergh has his chance. One chance. 14 days to prove that everything the experts know is wrong. But proving a theory in controlled conditions is one thing. War has a way of testing ideas that no laboratory can match. Over the next 13 days, Lindbergh flies 12 combat missions with the 475th Fighter Group. Not as an observer. As a combat pilot. He engages enemy aircraft over Saram Halmahera and the Vogelkop Peninsula. He pushes his engines to the limits of his own technique, running at 1600 RPM during cruise, and then surging to war emergency power during engagements. The results exceed every expectation. July 28th. The mission to Saram. 20 P-38s engage 7 Japanese aircraft at sea level. 4 enemy planes destroyed. 0 American losses. Every pilot returns with fuel reserves that should not exist. August 3rd. A sweep over Halmahera. Lindbergh personally shoots down a Ki-51 bomber, his first confirmed kill since he was officially forbidden from combat. His P-38 lands with enough fuel for another 90 minutes of flight. August 9th. The ultimate test. A 1,200-mile round-trip mission that would have been suicidal under standard procedures. Every aircraft returns safely. Several pilots report fuel reserves exceeding 20%. The mechanics inspect engines after every mission. They find no abnormal wear, no hot spots, no metal contamination in the oil. After 87 combined flight hours using Lindbergh's technique, the V-1710 engines show less degradation than engines operated under standard procedures for the same duration. Patterson requests permission to inspect the engines personally. He spends 3 hours examining cylinder heads, checking compression, analyzing spark plug deposits. When he emerges, his face tells the story before he speaks. "I do not understand it," he admits quietly to MacDonald. "The metallurgy should not allow this. The thermal dynamics should not support it. But the evidence is irrefutable. These engines are operating within normal parameters." He pauses. "I need to call Indianapolis." On August 15, 1944, General Whitehead issues 5th Air Force Operational Directive 44-127, Extended Range Cruise Procedures for P-38 aircraft. The document describes in precise detail the technique that Lindbergh has proven. 1,600 revolutions per minute, 30 inches manifold pressure, Autoleon mixture. The settings that every expert swore would destroy engines are now official doctrine. But getting headquarters to approve a technique and getting frontline squadrons to adopt it are 2 different challenges entirely. The 8th Fighter Group receives the directive on August 17th. Their commander, Colonel Philip Reed, reads it twice and throws it in the trash. "Some civilian is going to tell my pilots how to fly their aircraft," he says to his executive officer. "I have been flying P-38s since 1942. I know what these engines can handle. This Lindbergh technique is going to get men killed." Similar reactions ripple across the theater. The 35th Fighter Group ignores the directive entirely. The 49th implements it half-heartedly, with pilots reverting to standard procedures within days. Of 12 P-38 squadrons in the Pacific, only 3 fully adopt the new technique in the first week. The resistance is not just stubbornness, it is fear. Pilots have been trained for years that low RPM equals engine death. Changing that instinct requires more than a piece of paper from headquarters. It requires proof they can see with their own eyes. Lindbergh understands this, and he knows there is only one solution. Over the next 3 weeks, he visits every P-38 squadron in the theater personally. He does not lecture. He does not argue. He simply offers to fly alongside any pilot who wants to learn the technique. He demonstrates the settings in flight. He shows them the temperature gauges staying steady. He lets them watch his fuel consumption with their own eyes. One by one, the skeptics convert. Lieutenant James Morrison of the 8th Fighter Group is one of the first. He lost his wingman to fuel exhaustion in May. When Lindbergh lands after a demonstration flight with 60 gallons more fuel than Morrison expected, the young pilot does not say a word. He simply walks to his own aircraft and adjusts the propeller controls. By September 1st, every P-38 squadron in the 5th Air Force has adopted extended range cruise procedures. The fuel exhaustion death rate drops from 23 pilots per month to fewer than 5. Mission planning that was impossible in June becomes routine in September, and the Japanese begin to notice. Intelligence reports captured in late August describe American fighter behavior that Japanese analysts cannot explain. P-38 aircraft are appearing over targets far beyond their supposed maximum range. They are engaging in extended combat with energy reserves that should have been exhausted hours ago. They are hunting Japanese positions with a persistence that defies everything known about American fuel limitations. Enemy assessment reads one translated document. American forces have either developed new extended-range fuel tanks or have modified their engine systems in ways our engineers do not understand. Recommend treating P-38 operational radius as unknown until further intelligence is gathered. The Japanese are right to be confused, because Charles Lindbergh has not just extended the P-38's range, he has fundamentally changed the geometry of air combat in the Pacific. Targets that were sanctuaries are now killing grounds. Bases that were beyond American reach are now within easy striking distance. The strategic assumptions that governed Japanese defensive planning for 3 years are suddenly catastrophically obsolete. And the body count is starting to reflect this new reality. In July 1944, before Lindbergh's technique was widely adopted, the 475th Fighter Group destroyed 41 enemy aircraft. In September, using extended-range procedures fleet-wide, they destroy 78. The 8th Fighter Group, initially the most resistant to the new technique, sees their monthly kill total nearly double. The P-38 Lightning, once handicapped by its fuel consumption, is becoming the most feared aircraft in the Pacific. But success brings its own dangers. By mid-September, reports begin filtering through intelligence channels that Japanese analysts have identified the change in American tactics. They do not understand how the P-38s are achieving extended range. But they know something has changed, and they are working frantically to counter it. On September 22nd, MacDonald receives a classified briefing from 5th Air Force Intelligence. The Japanese have repositioned fighter squadrons to intercept American aircraft at extreme range. They are setting traps anticipating that P-38 pilots pushing the limits of their fuel will be vulnerable on the return leg. More concerning, there are reports of Japanese engineers examining wreckage from downed P-38s, searching for modifications that might explain the range increase. If they figure out what we are doing, the intelligence officer warns, they will adjust their tactics. Right now, they are confused. That confusion is keeping our pilots alive. But if they understand the technique, they can exploit it. MacDonald looks at Lindbergh. So what do? We do what we have always done, Lindbergh replies. We stay ahead of them. The technique works for cruise efficiency. But there is more performance available. The engines can handle more than we are asking. You want to push further? I want to win the war. In Part 3, the stakes escalate beyond anything Lindbergh imagined. Japanese intelligence closes in on the secret of American range superiority. A new enemy threat emerges that makes everything achieved so far meaningless. And Lindbergh is forced to confront a question that will define his legacy. How far is he willing to go to prove the experts wrong? The answer will cost lives. The answer will change history. And the answer is coming faster than anyone expects. From a forbidden engine technique to official military doctrine. From a civilian with no engineering degree to the man who rewrote aerial warfare. Charles Lindbergh had proven that 1600 RPM and 30 inches of manifold pressure would not destroy the Allison V-1710. He had extended the P-38's combat radius by 180 miles. He had converted skeptics, silenced critics, and watched every fighter squadron in the Pacific adopt his methods. But the Japanese were not fools, and they were starting to notice that something had changed. By late September 1944, intelligence reports from captured documents paint a disturbing picture. Japanese Air Command has identified a fundamental shift in American fighter operations. They do not understand how. They do not understand why. But they know that P-38 Lightnings are appearing over targets that should be beyond their range. And they are adapting. The confusion that protected American pilots for 6 weeks is evaporating. The enemy is learning. And they are preparing to fight back. This is no longer an experiment. This is war. September 18, 1944. A decoded transmission from Japanese 4th Air Army headquarters reaches American intelligence. The message is addressed to all fighter units in the Central Pacific. It reads, in part, American P-38 aircraft have demonstrated unexpected operational range. Previous assessments of maximum combat radius are no longer valid. All units will assume P-38 threat extends 300 kilometers beyond previous estimates until further notice. The Japanese are guessing. But their guess is dangerously close to accurate. More concerning are the tactical adjustments. Japanese fighter squadrons begin repositioning to intercept American aircraft at extreme range. They are setting traps along the extended flight paths, anticipating that pilots pushing fuel limits will be vulnerable during return legs. They station float planes along likely emergency landing routes, ready to strafe any American pilot who ditches. The numbers tell the story. In August, Japanese fighters intercepted American P-38 formations on 4 occasions during return flights. In September, that number jumps to 17. The enemy has identified a pattern and is exploiting it. At Rabaul, Japanese engineers examine wreckage from 3 downed P-38s, searching for modifications that might explain the range increase. They find nothing unusual: no extra fuel tanks, no engine modifications, no secret technology. The mystery deepens. Lieutenant General Teramoto Kumaichi, commander of 4th Air Army, convenes an emergency conference on September 24th. According to captured records, he tells his staff, "The Americans have changed something fundamental. Our intelligence has failed to identify what. Until we understand their method, we are fighting blind." He orders doubled patrols along all approach routes to major Japanese positions. He authorizes fuel expenditure previously considered wasteful. He is willing to burn resources he cannot spare because the alternative is worse. The Japanese are scared. They should be. Between August 15th and September 30th, American P-38 squadrons destroyed 231 enemy aircraft. This is a 47% increase over the same period the previous year. Japanese pilot losses reach levels that cannot be sustained. The Imperial Navy Air Service reports that replacement pilots are arriving with fewer than 100 flight hours. Some have never fired their weapons in combat. The kill ratio shifts from 12-1 to nearly 18-1. American pilots are not just reaching more targets. They are dominating engagements with energy reserves that Japanese pilots cannot match. But the enemy is learning, and learning enemies are dangerous enemies. On October 3, 1944, the crisis Lindbergh feared finally arrives. Captain William Harris of the 49th Fighter Group is leading a 4-ship formation back from a strike mission against Japanese positions on Halmahera. They are cruising at 1600 RPM, 30 inches manifold pressure, exactly as doctrine specifies. Fuel reserves are comfortable. The mission has been routine. Then Harris notices a flicker on his cylinder head temperature gauge. A slight increase. Probably nothing. 30 seconds later, the flicker becomes a spike. His number 2 engine temperature jumps 40 degrees in under a minute. Oil pressure begins dropping. Something is wrong. Harris has seconds to decide. He can shut down the engine and attempt a single engine return. He can push through and hope the temperature stabilizes. He can ditch immediately while he still has control. He chooses to shut down. But before he can reach the feathering switch, the engine seizes. The propeller locks. The P-38 yaws violently left. Harris fights for control as his wingmen watch in horror. He manages to level out, but the aircraft is crippled. He is 220 miles from the nearest friendly base. On one engine, running rich to prevent overheating, he does not have the fuel to make it. Harris ditches in the Pacific Ocean 43 miles short of Makmur. A rescue PBY reaches him 4 hours later. He survives. His aircraft does not. The investigation begins immediately. Maintenance crews examine Harris's surviving engine records. They interview ground crew. They analyze oil samples from aircraft that flew the same mission. The cause is traced within 72 hours. A batch of defective spark plugs manufactured by a subcontractor in Ohio has been installed in 17 P-38s across 3 squadrons. Under standard operating procedures with rich mixture, the defect is manageable. Under lean mixture, cruise settings, the plugs degrade faster, causing incomplete combustion and localized hotspots. The problem is not Lindbergh's technique. The problem is quality control 3,000 miles away. But the damage to confidence is immediate. Colonel Philip Reed, commander of the 8th Fighter Group, an original skeptic of extended-range procedures, seizes on the incident. "I warned you," he tells anyone who will listen. "Lindbergh's technique has killed an aircraft. How long before it kills a pilot?" The accusation spreads. Pilots who never fully trusted the new procedures begin reverting to standard settings. Fuel consumption increases. Range decreases. 3 weeks of progress threatens to evaporate. On October 8th, MacDonald summons Lindbergh to his office. The situation is grim. 4th Fighter Command is questioning whether extended-range procedures should continue. Allison's representatives are calling for a complete review. The spark plug manufacturer is denying responsibility and suggesting that improper engine operation caused the failure. Everyone wants someone to blame, and Lindbergh is the obvious target. "We need to prove this was not the technique," MacDonald says. "We need to prove it definitively. We need something so overwhelming that no one can question it again." Lindbergh studies the map on MacDonald's wall. His eyes settle on a cluster of islands northeast of New Guinea. "The Philippines," he says quietly. MacDonald follows his gaze. "That is 800 miles from our forward bases." "I know, that is impossible, even with extended range procedures." "Not impossible." Lindbergh traces a route with his finger. "Difficult. Dangerous. But not impossible. If we can hit targets in the central Philippines and return safely, no one will ever question the technique again." MacDonald stares at him. "You want to prove the technique works by flying the longest P-38 combat mission in history. I want to end the debate permanently." 4 days later, the mission is approved. October 12, 1944. Operation Stalemate. Dawn breaks gray and heavy over Makmur Drome. 36 P-38 Lightnings sit on the flight line, their twin engines gleaming with condensation. Ground crews have worked through the night, checking every spark plug, testing every fuel line, verifying every system twice. The target is Balikpapan, a major Japanese oil refinery complex on the eastern coast of Borneo. Round-trip distance 1,460 miles. The longest fighter escort mission ever attempted in the Pacific Theater. At standard cruise settings, the mission is impossible. At extended range settings, it is merely insane. MacDonald leads the formation. Lindbergh flies as his wingman. Neither man has slept more than 3 hours. Neither man shows any sign of fatigue. The briefing was simple. Get there. Protect the bombers. Get back. Do not die. At 05:47 hours, the first P-38 rolls down the runway. By 06:12, all 36 aircraft are airborne, climbing through scattered clouds toward assembly altitude. The bombers they will escort, B-24 Liberators from the 5th Bomb Group, are already en route. For the first 2 hours, everything proceeds according to plan. The formation cruises at 1600 RPM, 30 inches manifold pressure Autoleon mixture. Fuel consumption is optimal. Engine temperatures are nominal. The Pacific slides beneath them, an endless blue expanse that offers no forgiveness for miscalculation. At 08:23 hours, they rendezvous with the bomber stream. 47 B-24s in perfect formation, their bomb bays heavy with ordnance destined for Japanese oil storage tanks. The P-38s take escort positions. High cover, low cover, flanking guards. A choreographed dance of protection learned through 2 years of bloody experience. At 09:47 hours, they cross the coastline of Borneo. The Japanese are waiting. Radar installations on the northern coast have tracked the incoming formation for 30 minutes. Fighters from the 23rd Air Flotilla are already climbing to intercept. 32 Mitsubishi A6M Zeros and 12 Nakajima Ki 43 Oscars. 44 enemy fighters against 36 P-38s. First contact comes at 9:48 hours. Lieutenant James Chen spots them first. Bandits 2 o'clock high, count 40 plus. The Zeros dive. What happens next will be studied in war colleges for decades. Standard doctrine says the P-38s should stay with the bombers. Protect the strike package. Accept the defensive fight. But McDonald has fuel to burn. For the first time in Pacific combat history, American fighters at extreme range have the energy reserves to fight aggressively. Satan flight engage. All other flights maintain escort. 8 P-38s peel away from the formation. McDonald leads them directly into the diving Zeros. Not a defensive intercept. An offensive strike. Head on. Full power. The Japanese formation splits. They expected cautious Americans nursing fuel reserves. They find 8 Lightnings with manifold pressure climbing toward war emergency power, closing at a combined speed exceeding 600 miles per hour. First pass. 2 Zeros explode. A third trails smoke toward the jungle below. McDonald reverses hard. The P-38's weight becomes an advantage in the dive-building energy that the lighter Zeros cannot match. He picks up a Ki-43 attempting to escape toward the coast. 3-second burst. The Oscar's engine disintegrates. Lindbergh is on his wing. His guns find a Zero trying to line up on McDonald's tail. The Japanese fighter comes apart in midair. Above them, the main engagement erupts. American pilots are fighting with an aggression that should be impossible at this range. They have fuel. They have energy. They have confidence. The Japanese pilots have confusion. Their intelligence said these Americans would be defensive. Their intelligence was catastrophically wrong. In 11 minutes, the engagement ends. 14 Japanese fighters destroyed. 3 probables. 2 P-38s damaged, but flyable. 0 American losses. The bomber stream reaches Balikpapan untouched. 47 B-24s drop 312 tons of ordnance on the largest oil refinery in the Dutch East Indies. Secondary explosions continue for 6 hours. Japanese oil production in the region drops by 31% overnight. The return flight is anticlimactic. The P-38s cruise home at optimal settings. Fuel consumption matches predictions precisely. When the last Lightning touches down at Mockmerdrome at 16:34 hours after 10 hours and 47 minutes of flight, the mission has achieved everything Lindbergh promised. 1,460 miles, 36 aircraft, 0 losses. The debate ends. Within 48 hours, word of Operation Stalemate reaches every Allied command in the Pacific. The numbers speak louder than any argument. Longest fighter escort mission in history. Record enemy kills at extreme range. Perfect survival rate. On October 19th, Air Force Headquarters issues revised operational directives. Extended range cruise procedures are now mandatory for all P-38 missions exceeding 500 miles. Pilots who revert to standard settings without cause face disciplinary action. The tide turns visibly. In October, American P-38 squadrons destroy 317 enemy aircraft, breaking the previous monthly record by 43%. Japanese air strength in the Central Pacific, already strained, begins to collapse. Replacement aircraft cannot reach forward bases fast enough to replace losses. Experienced pilots die faster than new ones can be trained. By November, Japanese commanders face a choice no military leader wants to make. They can continue contesting air superiority and lose their entire fighter force. Or they can pull back, concede the skies, and fight a defensive war they know they cannot win. They choose retreat. The strategic implications ripple outward. Without air superiority, Japanese ground forces cannot be resupplied. Without resupply, garrisons wither. Islands that would have cost thousands of American lives to capture surrender after token resistance. The timetable for victory accelerates. Military historians later estimate that extended range procedures contributed to shortening the Pacific War by 3 to 4 months. The lives saved American and Japanese number in the hundreds of thousands. And it all started with one civilian asking a question no one else thought to ask. What if the experts are wrong? By the end of October 1944, Charles Lindbergh has flown 50 combat missions in the Pacific Theater. He has personally shot down one confirmed enemy aircraft. He has extended the operational capability of America's premier fighter by 32%. He has saved more lives than he will ever know. But his story is not finished. In November, President Roosevelt learns of Lindbergh's contributions. The political situation is complex. Lindbergh's pre-war opposition to American intervention has not been forgotten. His reputation remains controversial. The question of recognition becomes a matter of policy, not just merit. What happens to a hero who saved countless lives but remains politically inconvenient? What happens to an innovation so successful that the organization that created it no longer needs its creator? What happens when the war ends and the men who fought it are forgotten? Part 4 will answer these questions. It will reveal what history chose to remember and what it chose to forget. It will follow Charles Lindbergh from the Pacific to obscurity and back again. Because the story of the forbidden engine technique has one final chapter, and it is not the ending anyone expected. From a forbidden engine technique that every expert swore would destroy aircraft to official military doctrine that changed the course of the Pacific War. Charles Lindbergh walked into a remote airbase in New Guinea with nothing but an idea that 17 years of flying had taught him. He left having extended the P-38 Lightning's combat radius by 180 miles, saved the lives of 234 American pilots, and contributed to the destruction of over 1,400 enemy aircraft. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? This story has one final twist. And it is not the ending anyone expected. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones history chooses to forget. The war ends on September 2, 1945. In hangars across the Pacific, mechanics begin the long process of decommissioning aircraft that will never fly combat again. Pilots who survived pack their belongings and prepare for journeys home. The machinery of war slowly grinds to a halt. Charles Lindbergh is already gone. He left the Pacific Theater in September 1944, just weeks after Operation Stalemate proved his technique beyond all doubt. The official reason was that his consulting contract with United Aircraft Corporation had expired. The unofficial reason was more complicated. President Franklin Roosevelt never forgot Lindbergh's pre-war opposition to American intervention. The famous aviator had spoken at America First rallies. He had questioned the wisdom of fighting Germany. He had made statements that in the context of 1941 seemed dangerously close to appeasement. None of that mattered to the pilots whose lives he saved. All of it mattered to the politicians who controlled his fate. When the War Department considered awarding Lindbergh a Distinguished Service Medal for his contributions, Roosevelt personally intervened. The recommendation was quietly shelved. No ceremony, no recognition, no acknowledgement that a civilian consultant had revolutionized fighter operations in the Pacific. Lindbergh returned to civilian life. He worked as a consultant for various aviation companies. He wrote books. He traveled. He raised his family. And he almost never spoke about what he had accomplished in the skies over New Guinea. Colonel Charles MacDonald, who had trusted Lindbergh when no one else would finish the war as one of the highest-scoring American aces in the Pacific. 27 confirmed victories. He wrote letters to Washington recommending Lindbergh for official recognition. Every letter was politely acknowledged and quietly ignored. General Ennis Whitehead, who had overruled Allison's engineers and ordered the technique adopted fleet-wide, retired in 1951. In his memoirs, he devoted 3 pages to Lindbergh's contribution. The passage was cut by military censors who deemed it politically sensitive. Robert Patterson Allison's field representative, who had initially opposed the technique, returned to Indianapolis after the war. He spent 30 years with the company, eventually becoming chief engineer. In 1967, during a retirement interview, he was asked about wartime innovations. He mentioned Lindbergh by name. That man saved more lives than any medal could recognize, Patterson said. We told him he was wrong. We told him his technique would destroy engines. We were the experts, and we were completely, absolutely, humiliatingly wrong. He knew something we did not. He had the courage to prove it. That is rare. Lieutenant James Morrison, whose story we mentioned in Part 1, the pilot who ditched 62 miles from safety in May 1944, did not survive the war. But his younger brother William Morrison did. William flew P-38s with the 49th Fighter Group starting in August 1944. He used Lindbergh's technique on every mission. He survived 37 combat sorties and returned home to marry his high school sweetheart. 50 years later, in 1994, William Morrison attended a reunion of Pacific War veterans. Someone asked him about the Lindbergh technique. The old pilot's eyes grew distant. There was a time, he said slowly, when flying a long mission meant saying goodbye to your friends like you might not see them again. Because you might not. Then this fellow Lindbergh showed up and changed everything. Suddenly, we had fuel. Suddenly, we came home. My brother died before the technique spread. I lived because of it. 50 years I have been grateful for that. But the true legacy of Charles Lindbergh's forbidden technique extends far beyond individual lives saved in 1944. After the war, Allison Engine Company quietly revised every technical manual they had ever published. The prohibited operating range became the recommended cruise setting. Page 47, paragraph 3 was rewritten entirely. The new text read, "For maximum range efficiency, operate at 1600 revolutions per minute with manifold pressure not exceeding 30 inches of mercury and autolein mixture." No acknowledgement appeared that this directly contradicted previous specifications. No mention was made of the civilian who had proven them wrong. The manual simply changed, as if the old rules had never existed. But the principles Lindbergh demonstrated did not die with the P-38. They evolved. During the Korean War, American F-51 Mustang pilots used lean mixture cruise techniques derived directly from Lindbergh's 1944 innovations. Extended range operations over the Korean peninsula saved fuel and lives in patterns that would have been familiar to any pilot from the 475th Fighter Group. In Vietnam, propeller-driven aircraft like the A-1 Skyraider employed similar efficiency principles. Pilots, who had never heard of Charles Lindbergh, used techniques his forbidden experiments had validated. The direct lineage of innovation stretched across decades. Even the transition to jet engines did not erase his influence. Modern aircraft fuel management systems incorporate principles of optimized cruise efficiency that trace their intellectual heritage to the questions Lindbergh asked in 1944. What is the most efficient way to operate an engine? How do we maximize range without sacrificing reliability? The questions remain relevant. The answers he pioneered still apply. Today, every private pilot learns about lean of peak operations. Flight schools teach techniques for optimizing fuel mixture that derive directly from principles Lindbergh demonstrated. The FAA Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge contains sections on engine management that would have been familiar to any P-38 pilot in 1944. The knowledge survived even when the source was forgotten. The statistics tell a story that spans generations. Extended range cruise procedures remained standard doctrine for piston-engine military aircraft for 31 years from 1944 until the last propeller fighters were retired from frontline service. Conservative estimates suggest these techniques saved fuel equivalent to 73 million gallons during World War II alone. Adjusted for post-war operations, the total savings approach 150 million gallons. More importantly, the techniques saved lives. Not just the 234 pilots who survived fuel exhaustion situations during the war, but hundreds more in Korea, Vietnam, and countless training accidents prevented by better understanding of engine capabilities. But the greatest legacy is not measured in gallons or lives. It is measured in how we think about expertise and innovation. Why did Allison's engineers get it wrong? They were not stupid. They were not careless. They had conducted thousands of hours of testing. They understood their engines better than almost anyone alive. And yet they were completely wrong about what those engines could do. The answer lies in how they asked their questions. Allison tested engines for combat conditions: high power, rich mixture, maximum performance. They optimized for the most demanding scenarios, and they concluded correctly that under those conditions, low RPM operations were dangerous. What they never tested was the scenario Lindbergh actually faced: long-range cruise, moderate power, lean mixture, efficiency over performance. Their testing was thorough but narrow. Their conclusions were valid but limited. Lindbergh succeeded not because he was smarter than the engineers. He succeeded because he asked a different question. The engineers asked, "How do we maximize performance within safe limits?" Lindbergh asked, "What if the limits we assume are not the actual limits?" This distinction matters beyond aviation. Throughout military history, innovations that changed warfare often came from outsiders who questioned assumptions everyone else accepted. The tank was developed over the objections of cavalry officers who insisted horses were superior. Radar was initially dismissed by commanders who trusted visual observation. Aircraft carriers were opposed by battleship admirals who saw them as auxiliary vessels at best. In each case, the experts were not wrong about what they knew. They were wrong about what they assumed they could not know. They were prisoners of their own expertise. The same pattern appears in business, science, and society. Established organizations resist innovations that challenge their fundamental assumptions, not because the people in those organizations are foolish, but because expertise creates blind spots. The more you know about how things work, the harder it becomes to imagine how they might work differently. Lindbergh's gift was not technical knowledge. It was willingness to ask, "What if everyone is wrong?" That question is worth more than any engineering degree. And now, the detail that almost no one knows. In 1954, nearly a decade after the war ended, President Dwight Eisenhower made a decision that quietly reversed Roosevelt's wartime animosity. He restored Charles Lindbergh's military commission, which had been effectively revoked in 1941, and promoted him to brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve. The ceremony was small. The press coverage was minimal. Lindbergh himself requested no publicity. But during the private ceremony, Eisenhower handed Lindbergh a document that had been classified for 10 years. It was a memo from General George Kenney, commander of the Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific, dated October 1944. The memo recommended Lindbergh for the Congressional Medal of Honor. Kenney wrote, "Mr. Lindbergh has contributed more to the successful prosecution of the air war in the Pacific than any single innovation of the past 2 years. His extended range cruise technique has extended our combat radius by 180 miles, saved countless lives, and enabled operations that were previously impossible. He has flown combat missions against the enemy, despite having no obligation to do so. He has demonstrated physical courage, technical brilliance, and moral conviction in the face of institutional resistance. I recommend him for the highest honor our nation can bestow." The recommendation was rejected by the Roosevelt administration in November 1944. Political considerations outweighed military merit. The memo was classified and filed away. Eisenhower returned the original document to Lindbergh that day in 1954. "I wanted you to know," Eisenhower said, "that the men who flew with you understood what you did, even if the politicians did not." Lindbergh read the memo in silence. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. "Thank you, Mr. President," he said, "but the only honor that ever mattered to me was the pilots who came home." He never showed the memo to anyone else. It was found among his personal papers after his death in 1974. Charles Lindbergh died on August 26, 1974, on the island of Maui, Hawaii. He was 72 years old. His obituaries focused overwhelmingly on his 1927 transatlantic flight. The New York Times gave 3 paragraphs to his entire World War II service. Most accounts failed to mention the engine technique that saved hundreds of lives. He was buried in a simple grave on the grounds of Palapalahumao Church. The headstone gives only his name and dates. No mention of his rank, no mention of his achievements, no mention of the forbidden technique that changed aerial warfare. Perhaps that is exactly what he wanted. And so we come to the end of this story. Not with monuments or medals, but with a simple truth. From a civilian consultant with no engineering degree, and an idea that every expert called impossible to a revolution in fighter operations that extended the P-38's combat radius by 180 miles. Charles Lindbergh proved that sometimes the most important question is not what do the experts say, but what if the experts are wrong. 234 American pilots survived the Pacific War because of his forbidden technique. Over 1,400 enemy aircraft were destroyed by fighters that could reach targets previously beyond their range. The war itself may have been shortened by 3 to 4 months. Hundreds of thousands of lives, American and Japanese, were saved by the cascade of consequences that followed from one man's willingness to challenge what everyone knew to be true. The lesson endures. In every organization, in every field, in every era, there are assumptions that go unquestioned. There are limits that exist only because no one has tested them. There are experts who are certain about things they have never actually tried. The next breakthrough might come from anywhere. It might come from someone with decades of experience, or someone with none. It might come from inside the system, or from someone who walks in off the street. The only requirement is the courage to ask, what if everyone is wrong? Charles Lindbergh asked that question in June 1944, and because he did, pilots came home who would have died in the Pacific Ocean. Families were reunited who would have received telegrams. Children were born who would never have existed. That is the power of questioning assumptions. That is the legacy of one man with an impossible idea. If you know another story of innovation that changed history, share it in the comments below. This is just one of hundreds of forgotten innovations from World War II ideas that seemed insane until they saved lives. Subscribe to discover more stories that history almost forgot. Because sometimes the most important lessons come from the heroes no one remembers. The P-38 Lightning flew until 1949, when the last operational aircraft were retired from military service. But in hangars across America, a few pilots kept their Lightnings flying. Restored, preserved, remembered, and in every one of those aircraft, the engine settings that Charles Lindbergh proved in 1944 remain optimal. 1600 RPM, 30 inches of manifold pressure, auto-Leon mixture. The forbidden technique that everyone said was impossible. Still working. 80 years later. Some truths do not need official recognition. They simply endure.